This is the Woovebox, and it might just be the ultimate budget Groovebox.
Freebie.
Today's patron shoutout goes to Trickman Terry. Thank you so very much for the support. Let's get started. I first started this channel when I got my original P033KO. It was my introduction to electronic music, and I absolutely loved it. I couldn't believe how affordable it was, yet how much I could do with it. It was really mind-blowing for me at the time. I'd never experienced anything like it. Now, of course, it's a pocket operator, so it's got a ton of limitations, but I found most of the fun I was having with the P033 was in trying to skirt around those limitations. I mean, I implemented things like key signature changes and time signature changes and live instruments and even my own live drumming on an acoustic kit. I integrated all of those things into my P033 tracks. And thanks to the P033, my love of budget electronic music gear was born. Since then, I've acquired a lot more gear. However, nothing that I've added to my collection has matched that feeling of excitement and value and open-endedness that I felt when I first got this P033KO. Until this showed up. This is the Woofbox. Just like it says on the front right here, it is a micro music workstation. However, leaving it at that would be an incredible injustice to what just might be my favorite overall piece of gear that I've ever owned. Just a heads up, this is going to be a longer video than I normally make. I've just got way too much to talk about and to show you, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Also, yes, this unit was sent to me for free, and I was given a date of when I could release a video if I chose to make one. That was never part of the agreement. I was never asked to make a video or do anything other than take this out of the mailbox. This video, however, is not sponsored. It was not paid for in any way. Just like Loopop says, this channel is funded primarily by my patrons over at patreon.com/freebeat. Back in early May of this year, 2023 of course, I received an email from someone named Ivo Jaeger introducing me to a product called the Woovebox. He described how the Woovebox was his passion project, a goal of creating an affordable, pocket-sized device that could punch well above its weight. He offered me the opportunity to test one with no strings attached. Seriously, like I just said, he didn't even ask me to make a video or anything. There was none of the trade you the product for a video BS that so many companies out there try. Anyway, I said yes, I would love to take a look at it. As I popped over to the very much at the time under construction website he was working on, I started to realize just how serious Ivo was about this Groovebox. The feature list seemed to go on and on and on. Needless to say, I was intrigued. And then he told me his targeted price. $249 US. And that includes a case, he said. Okay, so now I was more than intrigued. How could a device that affordable have a feature list that long? Well, finally, after what felt like an eternity of anticipation, my Woofbox finally showed up, and my mind was blown. I quickly began to realize that the reason the Woofbox was actually able to hit such a low price point, and indeed follow through on that massive feature list, was due to Ivo's passion. We'd email back and forth multiple times a day discussing features and reasoning and constant firmware updates. Seriously, I would find a bug or come up with like a feature idea that I thought would be cool. I'd send that over in an email to him, and a lot of times I'd wake up the next morning with an email saying, hey, new firmware's ready, go ahead and give it a shot. I mean, it was one of the coolest things I've ever experienced. There'd also be several other paragraphs in that email talking about maybe a few other bugs that, fixing the original one led to, or other ways to implement a feature that he thought of and just added on the fly. The attention to detail was just something I hadn't really experienced before. Just to see the attentiveness, and again, the attention to detail was just absolutely inspiring at the highest level. I would highly recommend going to the Woofbox website and reading the About section, where Ivo talks about his background and the effort that went into the Woofbox. This is all from the ground up. Things like the synthesizer engine don't use any open source code at all, by the way. Ivo just did this. It's pretty impressive. Okay, so speaking of the Woofbox website, that's where I am right now. I just want to read you through this feature list because it is pretty ridiculous, okay? So, starting with the synthesizer here, we see 16-part multi-timbral, 16 tracks. One of those tracks is 4-voice polyphonic, then 15 of them are 4-voice paraphonic, or they can be mono tracks. There are 16 versatile synthesis algorithms, 17 low aliasing oscillator models up to 256 user samples, virtual analog, FM, supersaw, AM, ring mod, XOX percussion, and more. 2 oscillator models per voice, 1 multimode filter per voice, 10 different filter types, 2 amplitude envelope generators, 1 filter envelope generator, multiple LFOs per voice, global multi-effects, reverb, stereo chorus, 2 different stereo delays. Per voice effects are distortion, saturation, bit crushing, resampling, global multi-effects sends. Per voice dynamics, you've got a compressor and a limiter, 4 bus side chaining, yeah, you heard that right, gating, there's a master compressor and limiter, vinyl and noise effects, I've never used those. Emulates vintage digital, analog, and organic sounds, extensive complex sound design capabilities. Moving on to the sequencer, you get 16 songs that have 16 tracks, and those have 16 patterns, and those have 16 steps, but you can go way deeper than that. We'll get into that later in the video. Fast workflow, create new intricate song ideas in minutes. Yep. Polyrhythms, generative, arpeggio, and XOX style patterns. Yep. Uses scales, modes, chord types, and inversions without music theory. That's true. It's very, very cool. I'll show you that again in just a minute. Per step conditionals, like the electron boxes. Yeah, 100 plus step modifier types, probabilities, pattern chaining, pattern muting conditions, micro timing and swing, song mode with per fragment transformation and automation, send sync and MIDI to control connected gear, export songs as wave, and you can do stems too, dry and wet. There's an undo functionality, which is cool. Sampler, 62 seconds at 44.1 hertz. I don't know. I'm a noob when it comes to sampling, so I don't know what this means. I'll just be honest. 16 user kits with 16 samples, dedicated 3.5mm line input, digital sample import via Bluetooth, mangle, slice, chop, rearrange samples, add new oscillators, one-shots, and loops. Multi-sample, single instrument support, use live input as an oscillator model, resample internal synthesizer, automatic space management and optimization, and undo functionality in the sampler. And then down here we have an asterisk. It says polyphony restrictions may apply depending on used DSP resources. I've never come up against any restrictions yet, but I'm sure that's on there for a reason. I'm sure he's probably tried to push this as far as it can possibly go. So yeah, that's the feature list, just kind of quickly summarized as you'll find on Woofbox.com. The Woofbox website also grants you access to the Woof Connect web interface, which connects to your Woofbox via Bluetooth and should work on a variety of different platforms. You'll use Woof Connect to import and export samples to and from your Woofbox, as well as export songs and stems from the Woofbox. By the way, you can export both wet and dry stems, which I think is a welcome feature. Woof Connect also provides this handy on-screen overlay of your Woofbox, which mirrors what you're doing on your device in real time. This is going to make tutorials very easy to both create and follow, and is a very nice touch. Okay, so let's take a look at the Woofbox itself now. It is absolutely tiny, coming in at just under 3 inches by 3 inches, and it only weighs 2.4 ounces. On the left of the unit, we will find a USB Type-C port. That's how you charge the internal battery. Flipping around to the back of the unit, we will find a 3.5mm MIDI out jack, a physical power switch, thank you very much, and a 3.5mm line in. Then, on the right-hand side of the unit, we'll find the 3.5mm line out jack. That's it for physical I/O. The back of the unit is this kind of soft touch feel plastic. It feels good. Feels good. So let's move on to the face of the Woofbox now. The first thing you'll notice is probably this 4x4 grid of pocket operator-like buttons. These are your keyboard, menu, and so much more. Above those and to the right is the main encoder, known as the value knob. It is very notched and also functions as a button when you click it in. In the upper left and right-hand corners, you will find 2 soft touch buttons, write, and play. These have a variety of different functions and are calibrated every time you turn the Woofbox on to ensure accuracy. Then, in the middle, we have the display. Let's power the Woofbox on really quick. As you can see here, it's a segmented display, 2 lines, 4 characters, and it doesn't waste any space with unnecessary graphics. While this display might seem limiting, you don't need a ton of information with a device and workflow like this, as you'll see in just a few minutes. Plus, long pressing on most options gives you an extended text display of their functions. Real quick, I would just like to state that don't base what the Woofbox can do off of what you hear in this video, because I'm still very much learning it. I haven't yet had the time to be able to really deep dive into it like I know that I will. However, if you do want to hear the Woofbox performing as intended, check out some of the demos on the website. Seriously, this thing is awesome. I will say how fun it is to use. Thanks to features like the follow chord option that we'll discuss later, the ability to instantly randomize a pattern, you can whip up interesting patterns in just seconds and then fine-tune your results from there. It's a lot of fun to use, and the experience as a whole, I'll just say right off the bat here, is excellent. I'm going to take my ring off real quick. I keep bumping it on the desk and it keeps making that sound. Sorry, Lady Freebie. It'll go back on after the video. I do love the Woofbox, but not as much as you, I promise. Who am I kidding? She's not even going to watch this. So upon boot up, we start in song mode. This is represented by SG, and then the 01 there means we're on song 1. You can have up to 16 different songs on the Woofbox at any time. To switch songs while in song mode, simply hold play and press buttons 1 through 16. You get the idea. We'll go back to 1 here. We will return to song mode in a bit. So the Woofbox has 16 tracks per song, represented by the 16 grid buttons. As you can see, the buttons are labeled. We have chord, we have bass, we have lead, we have arp, and then we have kick, snare, hi-hat, percussion, and then we have 8 A tracks, A1 through A8. Those are just kind of auxiliary. However, these are just suggestions, because aside from the chord track on button 1 here, every other track can be whatever you want it to be, from synth engines to samples, whatever. To switch tracks, hold down the value knob, and then press buttons 1 through 13 to switch to that corresponding track. To switch to tracks 14 through 16, hold down the value knob and long press on those corresponding buttons. There you go, you can see we're on A8 now. Short pressing on buttons 14, 15, and 16 while holding down the value knob takes you to the sampler, live mode, and back to song mode where we just were. Let's jump to song 16 because I know that one is empty, and then we will hold the value knob and press button number 5 to go to the kick track. Okay, so at this point in the video, I'm guessing I might lose some of you just because the workflow and the UI is a little different, but I beg you, please check this out because I think it's freaking genius, and once you learn one track, you've learned them all. So each track has many different pages. By default, we start off in the sequencer page. As you can see, the screen says 01 KI SEQ. That means we're on pattern 1 of the kick track on the sequencer page. Let's go ahead and plug the output of the Woofbox into the audio interface and start making some sounds. Like I said, we're on pattern 1 of the kick track on the sequencer page, and on that sequencer page, we can live play our sound by using the grid buttons. Let's turn up our volume real quick. To do that, hold play and turn the value knob. There we go. As you can hear, it's a kick drum. To sequence a sound into a pattern, simply select the sound you wish to sequence. Let's take this kick right here, the E. Then we hold the right button, and now this grid here becomes just a simple 16-step pattern. So 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and let's go ahead, sequence 4 on the floor. I let go of right, and now I'll press play to hear our work. There we go. Now, there's a lot more we can do from the sequencer page, but for the sake of this video not being hours long, we need to move on. So we scroll through the various pages of our track using the value knob. Starting from the sequencer, we have pattern, global, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, amplitude, filter, pitch, pan, dynamics, and patch. And remember, these are specific for each track. One very important detail is that you can instantly return to the sequencer page at any time by simply clicking in the value knob. So right now I'm on the pan page. If I click the sequencer or the value knob in, now we go to the sequencer just like that. You can then click it again to return to whatever page you were on before. This makes adjusting parameters and quickly returning to sequence them a snap. Let's return to the pattern page of our kick track. To access the different options within a page, we look for lit up buttons on the grid. As you can see here, the pattern page has 9 different options. Holding down a grid button accesses that option, and then turning the value knob adjusts the value. You'll also hear the sound of whatever instrument you're on, but only when you release a button. This helps on pages that are focused on sound design, since you can make the change, then get to hear it when you release the button. So let's look at the different options here on this page. In the pattern page, button 1 is the beat division. This determines how fast each step of a track moves for this particular pattern. So for instance, it's set to 1 right now. That's how our pattern moves. If I set it to 2, there we go, hit play. Check it out on the sequencer. There we go. Cool. I'm going to set that back to 1. Button 2 is pattern length. You can set this anywhere between 1 and 16 steps. Super handy. Lets you do odd time signature stuff easy. Buttons 3 and 4 have to do with pattern chaining. Buttons 5, 6, 7, and 8 have to do with mute triggering and how the pattern behaves while chaining. And button 9 lets you set the follow chord setting. More on that later. Turning through the other pages, you can explore the rest of the options per page. And I recommend checking out the Woofbox website to make sure you know what they all do. This is one of those devices where there are so many options, you'll be discovering new things it can do for a very, very long time. So now you know how to navigate tracks. Like I said, once you know one track, you know them all. That's one of the great things about the Woofbox. A lot of the different options and parameters are consistent across all of the tracks, and even things like song mode. For instance, here on the sequencer page, simply hold right, click in the value knob to cycle through options such as copy pattern, paste pattern, initialize pattern, or even randomize pattern. These are consistent across all tracks, and you can actually use the same function like within song mode. So let's go to song mode by holding down value, clicking song. So if I wanted to initialize a song, I know that I get there by holding right and clicking in the value knob. There's a bunch of different options here, but we can cycle through them all. There we go, initialize song, in the same place as we found it for initialize pattern on the sequencer of the kick drum track. One more example, if I go back to the kick drum track and go all the way to the patch page, this is where I pick different patches. If I hold down right, click on the value knob, we'll find paste patch, initialize patch, dump patch, copy patch, paste patch. There you go. So it's all done the same way. A lot of care was taken to make sure that you can very efficiently do what you want to do. Okay, so speaking of patches, the Woofbox has a full-blown synth engine with more features than a lot of other Grooveboxes, regardless of price or size. The synth engine was created from the ground up without any open source code. 2 oscillators per patch, 16 different synthesizer algorithms, 17 oscillator models, 2 amp envelopes per voice, 10 different filters with envelope and LFO per voice, pitch LFO per voice, bit crush, saturation, distortion effects per patch, sense to reverb, chorus, 2 different delays per patch, and seriously so much more. You can use custom user samples as oscillators. You can even have incoming audio act as an oscillator, passing through the filter and amp sections. Of course, those both have syncable LFOs to your sequencer as well, so there's just so much you can do. I've barely played with the sound design, mostly using some of the preset patches. By the way, you can have up to 16 patches per track, but I know so many of you are going to be thrilled with the flexibility on offer here. This is another instance where heading to the Woofbox website to just take in all that it can do would be a very good use of time. It's also got true sidechaining with 4 different buses available, adjustable attack and release per track, different ratios, etc. It's all here. It's also got an option that I like a lot called fake sidechaining, which basically gives your selected track a 4 on the floor type pumping effect just by itself, which is great if you're going for that basic pump sound. It's sort of like how the PO20 arcade functions. Speaking of the PO20 arcade, let's talk about the chord track on the Woofbox and how it can relate to all of the other tracks. You see, on the arcade, you set one chord to play for each pattern, and then the rest of the instruments all adapt to that chord, so you'll never have notes out of key. It's great, but it's also very limiting. The Woofbox takes this concept and blows it wide open. You see, on the Woofbox, the chord track is a fully sequenceable track. It offers 16 different chord types per step, along with many different inversion types depending on the chord selected. Now, here's where the fun begins. The other 15 tracks have a setting on their global page called Follow Chord under button number 4. This allows you to select from different algorithms that force the track's notes to follow whatever chords are currently playing on the chord track. Yes, you can also turn this completely off on a per track basis, and yes, root note, where the track just follows the root of the chord, is also an option. That's great for simple bass lines. You'll also notice when I'm previewing my sounds here on the bass track, as long as I have follow chord turned on, I can hear the chord in the background to hear how it will relate. Let's go ahead and sequence a super simple bass line here. There we go. But it goes even deeper than that, because there's also an option on the pattern page of all of the other tracks to have their own follow chord setting just for that pattern. So you can set it to global to follow whatever the global follow chord setting is for that track, or you can give each pattern its own instruction. The options here are absolutely staggering. It should also be noted that you can make other tracks up to 4-note paraphonic as well, and those will also be based on what the chord track is doing. In addition to the synth engines, the Woofbox also functions as a sampler and sample player. Now, like I previously mentioned, you can import samples via Woof Connect, but you can also sample directly via the line in, or you can resample the internal synth engines. You get 16 different sample kits, each with 16 different samples, and the total sample time is 62 seconds. Samples can also be used as oscillators. They can be sliced and chopped, pitched around, ran through effects. You get the idea. The Woofbox is also capable of multi-sampling, which is unheard of in a device this portable. The implementation is quite simple. A multi-sampled instrument takes up one whole sample kit, and it can contain up to 16 different samples. Whichever pitch you choose to play plays with the sample that is closest in pitch, if that makes sense. This is admittedly a feature that I have not tried yet. There are quite a few features on here that I haven't gotten around to trying yet, actually. Okay, let's head back to our bass track here and talk more about the sequencer again. We'll go over some of the individual step parameters. These are going to be kind of similar to what you might find on an Electron box. To access these, simply long press on a step with a note on it on the sequencer page. So here we are. Let's pick this bass note right here on the end of beat 2. We start with a note, and you can sequence any note that you'd like. However, please note that if you do have a follow chord setting, it will adhere to that. So there we go, because we do have that follow chord enabled there. So as you can see, we only have the white keys because I'm guessing we're in C major. If we click in the value knob, we'll go to the next section here. We've got velocity, and again, these are per step. This one's pretty self-explanatory. If we go again, we've got length, how long we want the note to actually play for. If we go again, we've got shift. This is how you access micro timing. I should also mention that the Woofbox has per track swing as well. Then we get to the when and do pages. These are conditional triggers that sort of combine the electron conditions with the OPZ's step components. When is the condition, and do is the change. Under when, we can see always, which means it always plays. Then we can see some other standard options like 1 of 2, 1 of 3, 1 of 4, 1 of 5, second time through a pattern, third, fourth, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. And then we have probability, so a 25% chance to trigger, 50, and 75. So right now this note has a 75% chance to trigger. There, it didn't go. There we go. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Do, though, is where things get crazy. I would recommend looking at the Woofbox website for all of the options here, but just know that things like slide up, slide down, retriggering / ratcheting, accents, pitch up, pitch down, all of those kinds of things are here. And so much more. I think there's like 100 of these. It's just crazy. You can do like things like only trigger the pitch LFO when the when condition is met, and then play the note normally without it, or don't play the note at all without it. Yeah, there's so much. The Woofbox can also have multiple instruments on a single track, much like machine locking on an Electron box, or similar to how trackers function. For instance, this entire pattern is only using one track, and I have all of the steps on it set to a 75% probability. Now, with everything we've talked about so far, you've probably gathered that you're able to create some incredibly complex rhythms and melodies with only one single pattern. And you'd be right, but we haven't even touched on song mode yet. So, the Woofbox on paper only has 16 patterns available per project, with a max length of those patterns just being 16 steps. If that were it, it simply wouldn't be enough. I've complained at length in the past about Grooveboxes not having enough patterns or pattern length being too short. So I clearly love the Woofbox. What's different here? Song mode is what's different. It's an entirely different beast. Song mode makes a song. Really? Is that my script? Song mode makes a song based on fragments. Fragments are a bit like scenes in the Novation Circuit products. They're a collection of patterns across all of your tracks. However, much like everything else that the Woofbox does, this concept is expanded upon greatly. So, first of all, the architecture of the Woofbox itself makes fragments very intriguing. For example, your first fragment could just be your kick drum playing its first pattern. We can set a length for the individual fragment. As you can see here, fragment 1 is just 2 bars long, and I have 2 tracks active on this fragment. The kick drum track, or track 5, and then one of my auxiliary tracks, track 16. If I hold down this track here, we can see it's got the behavior to play, and it's playing pattern 10 of that track. If we come down here, pattern 10 of that track. Like I said, we can set a length for the individual fragment, so I have this fragment set to 2 bars long. I'll hit play very briefly here. Then I'm going to stop it because as soon as those 2 bars are up, it's automatically going to move on to fragment number 2, which we can see by the screen is 4 bars long. You can also see we've brought in some new tracks here. So fragment 1 was just track 5 and 16. Now we brought in the chord track, track 1, and the bass track, track 2. Here we're playing pattern 10 on the chord track, and pattern 10 on the bass track, and we're still on pattern 10 and pattern 10 on the other 2. Now, you heard a drum fill there. How did that happen? Well, fragments also respect pattern chains for individual patterns. So I bet if we go to the kick drum track itself here and look at pattern 10, if we go to the pattern page, if I go to chain, we can see that I have this pattern set to repeat 5 times and then chain to pattern 11. Well, what's pattern 11? Pattern 11 is that fill, and then it chains back to pattern 10. So fragments in song mode respect individual chains, which is just crazy. Fragments can also be shorter than 1 bar if you want to implement odd time signatures. Just make sure they line up with your patterns individually. So this fragment here is 13 steps long. Let's take it from fragment 3 and have a listen to how this works. Like I said, you just have to be sure that the pattern length lines up with the fragment length. Or if you don't line those up, that's when you start to get shifting polyrhythms, which the Woofbox is also very, very good at. I will be doing a video on how you can have these kind of ever-changing patterns with the Woofbox very shortly. And it's pretty crazy how fast you can whip up something like that on the Woofbox and then fine-tune it from there. So hopefully it comes across how crazy song mode is, but I do want to mention one more thing. So let's go to an empty fragment here. I'm going to bring in the chord, the bass, and then those 2 drum tracks. We know pattern 10 is where they want to be. Yeah. So if I just set this to like, I don't know, infinite? Oh, wow. Fragments can go very far. By the way, you can have up to 100 fragments in a song, I believe. We'll go 16 bars. Let's say we want a 16-bar keyboard solo. So right now, we are using 1 pattern from 4 different tracks. And remember, we have 16 tracks, and each of those have 16 patterns. So let's say we want to implement a 16-measure keyboard solo. Well, let's go to an unused track. Let's just go to track A2. That's empty. Going to turn off the follow chord part. And now, let's use the randomize feature to make a random keyboard solo here, shall we? So go to the sequencer, pattern 1, randomize pattern. Same thing on pattern 2. So now if we go back to pattern 1 here, let's go ahead and solo this track too, which is very easy. You know how you can move tracks by holding value and pressing a track button? If you select a track and then select it again, you'll solo it. Now let's go through and chain these patterns together here. There might be an easier way to do this. Can't remember. Okay, so I have now chained all 16 of the patterns on track A2 into each other. So it'll go pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 16, right? Really quick, let's go to the global page though, and I'm going to put some distortion. There we go, just so we can hear the sound over the chords and the bass. We're back on our song now, fragment 10. We've got pattern 10 for the chord, the bass, the kick, and the extra drum track playing. Let's go ahead and enable track A2 and pattern 1, because that's going to chain through all 16 measures of that solo. And of course, our fragment length is also 16, so here we go. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing, but you get the idea. We have 16 unique measures of keyboard solo there, and we only used 16 measures of 1 track, because any track can be anything. Basically, the way I look at it is any pattern on any track can be used for anything, meaning you are not just locked down to 16 patterns in the slightest. Hopefully I did a good enough job explaining that. It's kind of confusing to wrap your head around at first, but once you get it, you really get it, I promise. There's also different behaviors for individual tracks on a fragment. So let's just pick our kit track here. The behavior I have set to play, but we could also set it to mute, fade in, fade out, filter cutoff, pitch up, pitch down. Yeah. So there's more behaviors you can sneak in there, definitely. And that's chord lock, I believe. Retrigger, so you can do fills that way with different types too. Yeah, there's so much here. And like I said, you can have up to 100 fragments per song, so you can start to see just how powerful the Woofbox is as a songwriting tool. Not to mention the fact that you can export your audio, including wet and dry stems. It should also be noted that Song Mode has a master compressor as well as settings for the individual send effects. As if all of that wasn't enough, there's also a live mode, which I haven't even gotten around to using yet. I believe it's similar to Song Mode, but it allows you to mute tracks on the fly, program scenes, which are sort of like fragments, schedule scene changes, play live melodies over the tops of scenes, and more. Now, the Woofbox also has MIDI out over its 3.5mm MIDI jack, and each of its 16 tracks can transmit MIDI data. This, of course, allows the Woofbox to be the brain of your setup, and it's another feature that I haven't really been able to play with much yet. But it's not really something I use on most Grooveboxes anyway. I can confirm indeed that it does work, though. Now, you're probably wondering if I have any complaints, and honestly, I do, but just a few. First of all, I'd love for this to have an internal speaker, even just a crappy little one like the Pocket operators do. You know, just like I said a couple weeks ago for the Polyenda Tracker Mini, I think all portable gear should have a built-in speaker for when inspiration strikes. My second complaint is that the value knob can sometimes jump to seemingly random values. I'm not sure if that's because I have a very early unit or not, but it can be annoying. Third, as of right now, there's only a few when conditions for triggering do effects. I'd love to see more of those. Oh, I had a fourth one written on here that the max BPM only went up to 180, but I forgot I talked to Evo about that, and he fixed that. So now tempo goes up to 260. Perfect. The slowest it can go to is 80, but you can get around that by extending the beat division of your patterns, so that's not a big deal at all. Woof Connect can also be a pain to get to properly pair, especially on Windows. That took me a couple hours to actually get sorted, and I know some of that is on Microsoft, actually probably most of it. And I do have a little list of wants as well, like a random LFO shape in the LFO section for, well, there's many different LFOs on here. I'd love to be able to turn off scale and key in the global section of a song for like complete freedom, but honestly, you don't really need that. That was another thing I talked to Evo about, and he basically showed me that you can get around that super easily. And those are all just, you know, little gripes. It's honestly pretty hard to find faults when the box is this small, the feature list is so long, and the price is so low. As you can probably tell, I am completely enamored with the Woofbox. The amount of passion that Evo put into this project is staggering, and I'm continuously wowed by his dedication and excitement for the Woofbox. The price to feature ratio is absolutely incredible, and I really do think it's just a phenomenal product. I can't wait for you all to be able to get your hands on it, and I'll be making many videos on it in the future. A humongous thank you to Evo for not only sending me this Woofbox, but for taking the time to communicate with me, help me learn, and working tirelessly to make this Groovebox as powerful as possible. I do hope you found this video informative or at least entertaining. If you did, be sure to leave a like on it. If not, you can always leave a dislike. That's okay too. Doesn't hurt my feelings, just makes me try that much harder next time. Either way, be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell. Thank you all so very much for being here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.